Hi everyone, welcome to JavaTechie. In this tutorial, we'll understand how to handle exceptions for functional endpoints in Spring WebFlux. Okay, alright. As you all knows, error and exception handling is one of the key aspect, and also we can say this is one of the way we make sure that we handle our failure consistently, right? So let's quickly demonstrate global exception handling mechanism for reactive functional endpoints. So without any further delay, let's get started. So before we start this tutorial, let me do a small announcement. As you all knows, I am launching my first Spring Boot microservices live courses on 1st August, and I could see more people enrolling in the course. Thank you all for enrolling and choosing me as your trainer. But if you can remember, earlier we are giving a 40% off coupon to only the first 100 users. But since more people are enrolling the course, we extended the limit to 200. I mean 200 people can only get 40% off on course price. So if you are not enrolled or you are planning to do it, then do it today itself. Okay, cool. Now let's move to our context. Let me go to my IntelliJ IDE. Already I created one small application using Spring Reactive. So I just define the endpoints using the traditional approach as well as the functional endpoint. So I'll show you both the example. Let's go to this book controller. So this is how we can define in traditional approach, right? Just define the HTTP method and the URL. So if you observe here, I have the book repo. This is just a static data. I am just returning 20 book object. Now if we'll check in the controller, here I have two methods who will return all the book object from the DB. DB means the repo, and there is another method who will return a single book object. Okay. Now let's move to the functional endpoint. So if you'll open this book handler class, not this one. If you'll go to this app router config, this is how I define my functional endpoint. If the user is giving this particular URL /route/books, then I am telling to this Spring Reactive, please redirect that particular request to this book handler class and this get books method. Okay, that is how I named it as a handler. You can give any name, you can give service or anything. Okay, it's just a naming convention. If you are using functional endpoint, then your service layer, it's better to give the name with handler. Now similarly, if we'll go and check if user will give the second URL to get a book by its ID, then I'm telling just call this particular method. So this is how we can define the functional endpoint. So I believe you have basic understanding of reactive programming and how to define the functional endpoint. If not, I would strongly suggest you go to my playlist, then search with the keyword Spring Reactive. You will find a complete playlist here. Okay, there are total 11 video. You can check out this particular tutorial. I will share the link in video description. Now let's go to the code. Now we'll just focus on the exception handling concept in this particular example. Now we know how we can handle the exception in traditional approach. So if you go and check in this book controller, let's consider this particular example where I'm just fetching the book object by book ID. Okay, if that book ID is not found, then I'm throwing this exception. As you know, in repo we are just returning 20 book object with 20 ID. Let's say user is giving 21, then I am just throwing this book API exception, book not found with ID, this. Now since I am throwing this exception from the controller, that is how I just created one handler class, which is the global exception handler you can consider. There I am just annotate at the rate REST controller advice. Then in exception handler annotation, I am just telling to this particular Spring, if the controller will throw this particular exception, then execute this method where I am just creating a map and I'm just setting two field error message and status, and that is what I am returning. So when book API exception occurred in your controller, immediately user will get these two response. By seeing this response, user will understand, okay, this is what the error message and this is what the status, right? Now this is what we can do in the traditional approach. But if you'll check in the functional endpoint, we don't have any HTTP method logic here. We are just defining this is what the get method and just call this particular handler. but we don't have any option to handle the exception or to delegate the exception from my endpoint to the next global handler, right? So how we can do that, that is what we just want to cover in this particular tutorial. But before that, let me show you how it works in the traditional approach. Okay, then also we'll check how it will work in the functional endpoint approach. So first, this is what the traditional approach, right? Let me go to the postman, then just hit the endpoint, click on new http request. This is the get, right? http localhost, then 8080 slash books to get all the books, right? Just click on send. We are getting all the book object up to 20, right? This is what the random book object we created in our repo. I just want to fetch the book by id, let's say 1. I'll get the value. If I'll give 20, I'll get the value. But if I'll give 21, it will throw the book API exception. And again, request will delegate to the controller advice, and we'll just get the response as a, this is what the error message, book not found with ID 21, and the request should be bad request. Okay, because the user input is not valid. So it's always recommended to give the bad request. In fact, here you can see the status as 200. We can change that status to 400 as well. Okay, it's good practice to keep the status as 400 when you are just throwing the bad request. Fine. Now let's see how it behaves in functional endpoint. So let me verify the endpoint URL. Go to the app route config slash route books will return the list of book object or flux of book object, then route slash book, then book ID. Okay, just let me remove this. Just remove additional slash route. Okay, I copied twice. Just remove it. Just send it. We'll get all the 20 book object. Now I'll just search with book ID. Let's say 20. I'll get the result. Now if I'll search with 21, we don't have any logic to handle the exception in functional endpoint so far. Now let's see how we are getting the exception or how we can visualize it. Then I will guide you the next step how we can handle it. Just hit with 21. This ID is not present. Just click on send. We are not getting anything, right? We are just getting 200. Now how we can do that? Let's go to the code. This route config, then go to book handler. Now here we are just returning the next. Here I need to validate actually switch if empty, then I just need to return the error mono dot error. I'll just return the exception new book API exception with a message book not found with book ID. Just pass the ID. Okay, I'll just add a colon here. Earlier we don't have any validation logic. Now we just added if that book is not found, then throw this exception. Now we'll see how it will display on our console. Let me restart the application. So application started here on port 8080. Now go to the postman and let's hit the same endpoint. We are getting this error, right? Path is this, timestamp is this, and status code is 500. Error message is internal server error, and this is what something request ID. But this is incorrect, right? We are expecting the status should be 400 and the error message should be book not found with the ID this. Okay, by default message won't display in the console or in this particular response. So how we can override that? You need to add one key and value in your application.properties file or application.yml file. Just go to the one of them and just add this particular key and value. Server.error include message always. Always I want to display the message. Okay, the message which I am returning or throwing from my application, I just want to display that particular message. So that is the reason you need to add this particular key and value. Now let me restart this. So it started. Now again hit the same endpoint. Now you can see the message here, right? Book not found with book ID this. This is what the particular message we are throwing from our handler, right? You can see here status, error, message, request ID, timestamp, all those information I don't want to return to the end user. I just want to return the message or the path what user is trying or any status code. These are the field enough to display as a response so that a end user can easily understand, okay, this is what the mistake I did. I need to modify my request. Now the question here, how we can override this? To override this, first we should know from where Spring getting those information and displaying as a console. So to override that, first we should know how it works internally, right? So what happened? Spring Reactive internally use one class, something called default error web exception handler dot class. Okay, if we'll go to this class extends from abstract error web exception handler. So to override that, we need to create a class, then we need to extend from this particular abstract error web exception handler, then we need to override this render method, render error view, and get routing function. Okay, now whatever the map you are seeing in this particular response being rendered here, so you can see here get error attributes. This will return you as a map, and that is what you can see here. Now if you will open here, this is what the particular map I can't see each field, but yeah, I can debug and I can show you. Otherwise, when we will override, I will show you how the value is getting populated. Okay. Now what we can do to override this default behavior, let's create a class and extends it from abstract error web exception handler. Then we'll modify as per our need. Okay. So what I'll do, I'll just create a package, or I can simply just create inside this handler package. I'll just create a class. I'll just name it book API. I'll make it capital book API exception handler or something like that. Okay. Then first I need to annotate this with any stereotype annotation. So I'll define @component. Then I just need to extend that from the class abstract error web exception handler. Okay. So just extends from this. Now it will force you to override the method. Now you can see here it will force you to override the method. Just implement that get routing function. Now still it is crying, right? So what we need to do, we just need to call the super constructor. So let me expand this. Yeah. So what we can do, see here there is no default constructor available in this particular class. So just add this super constructor. Okay. Now this is sorted. So we have the book API exception handler. Then from there we are just calling the super class constructor, which is abstract error web exception handler constructor. Now here we need to add another class to just define our reader and writer so that we can write our own exception handling mechanism and we can read it, because we don't want this default message, right? We can customize using our own reader and writer. So there is a class something called server something like code configurer. Yeah, server code configurer. I'll just name it configurer. Now here what you need to do, just this dot set message reader, get it from configurer dot get readers. Similarly you can do this dot set message writers, get it from get writers from configure. Okay, now we have defined our own reader and writer. Now in this get routing function, which is the overridden method from the superclass, which is abstract error web exception handler, there we just need to tell for what all endpoint you want to implement this custom error handling mechanism. Okay, so what we can do here, we can define router functions dot route. If you observe, route is overloaded method. You can define this, then you can define the method type for what exact method you want to. Let me do that. But we will not do this particular pattern because I just want to implement this custom exception handling mechanism for all the endpoint. Okay, you can define the URL here and you can define the method to render the exception message. Okay, so I'll show you how you can do that, but now we'll do for all. Okay, so how we can do that, there is something called request predicate or something like that, predicates dot all. In fact, here also you have message to define for each HTTP method type, but for this particular example I just want to implement for all the method. Okay, because there is nothing makes sense to make it for all, because we have only one method in our router config, right? Let me show you. For this particular method only we are just handling the exception, you can see here, right? But for coding practice it's better to keep for all. Now here what you need to do, just define a private method. I will define something like render exception. Okay, I'll just create this private method. Now here this should be mono of server response. I'll just remove this mono of server response, and this should be server request. Now here first we need to get all the error attributes. So whatever the key value we are seeing, those are the error attributes. First we need to get that from the default implementation, then only we can customize it, right? So from where I can get it, if you'll go here and if you'll I'll directly copy this particular piece of code, because this will give me the map of error attribute. So just copy here, fine. Okay, I can just remove this argument. Let's see. This is crying, so let me do one thing. Okay, rather than this, what I'll do, I'll just define error attributes options defaults. Okay, now just create the server response object and just return it back. So what I'll do, I'll just create server response dot status. Okay, I'll just give http status, bad request, right? http status, it should be bad request. Then just define content type. I'll just define application JSON. Okay, media type application JSON. Next what I can do, I'll just insert the body dot body. Simply for now I'll just return this particular error object. Okay, this is the default map. Then I will show you how you can remove that from the map. So body inserter dot form value from value or something like that. Just check for others. Yeah, body inserters dot from value and give the value as a error properties, or what is that error, right? Just copy this, paste it here. That's it. Okay, now let's run our application. I'm pretty sure we'll get the exception because of this web properties dot resources, because you need to define that bean. But let me run it, we'll see the exception, then we'll fix it. I'll just stop this, then I'll just run this application. Yeah, so if you can see the console here, we are getting parameter 1 of constructor in this bean of web properties, and you can see here, right? Consider defining a bean of type this particular web properties dot resources. So simply what I can do, you can define anywhere, but since we have some config package, I can directly define a bean here, public web properties dot resources. Okay, so I'll just name it something like resources, any name you can give. Now I'll just return the same, return web properties dot resources. Okay, I need to define a new resources. Don't know what is going on. Yeah, fine. Now I just need to define this with annotated @bean. This is what Java based configuration, right? Now let me rerun the application. Okay, application not started because of the exception, so we'll rerun it. So you can see here application started without any error. Now go to the postman and let me just hit the same endpoint of the functional endpoint. Just click on send. Now you can see something like path, timestamp, error, request ID. Again, this is not something relevant, right? Now you might have a question, why we are getting this value? So if you'll go and check in your implementation, we are not doing anything. Whatever the get error attributes we are getting, same attribute or same error attributes we are just setting as a body. That is what we can see here, right? If you don't want anything from this map, you can simply do error dot remove, let's say status, okay? Or I'll just do something error dot remove. You can check the key from this map which you don't want to display, let's say request ID. But if you observe, we are getting the correct status code, which is 400 bad request. If you don't want anything to be displayed as part of the default error attributes, you can directly remove, because this is the map. From this map, we can remove the key. If you remove the key, that particular object will be not available, and you won't see those two fields as part of your response. But that is not our solution, right? But before that, I just want to show you the output. Then we'll see how we can customize this key and value, or how I can define my own error attributes. Okay, I'll show you. So let's wait. We'll just observe by removing these two fields. I just restarted. Yeah, so you can see here it started. Let me hit the same endpoint. We cannot see those two fields, right? Status and request ID. We can see only timestamp, path, and error. This is the internal server error message is displaying. That is expected because we are just overriding the default behavior. That is what the default behavior, right? This dot get error attributes. Now the main thing you need to understand, how I can define my own error attributes. If you remember, let me try this. This is the traditional one. If I will just click on send, I am getting the error message and status. These are my own custom error attributes. Okay, so that is how I can define the same in functional endpoint. So to do that, what you can do, I'll just create another class here, new Java class. Let's say global. I'll just name my class name global error attributes. You can give any name, guys. Then you need to extend that class from default error attributes. Okay, and you need to define this at the rate component attributes. It should force to override something. Okay, let me check the class. There are some method get error attributes, something like that. Yeah, this method. This is the okay. So we need to override that method actually. Get error attributes. Okay, this is the method. Now here what you can do, you can create your own map. I'll just create a map of string, value as a string, or I'll just name it error map, new hash map. Okay, now what you can do, I'll just create object of throwable. I'll just name it error, and I'll just call the get error method of request. We're just giving this request, right? Fine. Now here in this error attributes, which is nothing, the error map, I just need to put the status or whatever the field I want from this particular error object. Okay, I'll show you. Just map dot put. I'll just key as a I'll just give something like message. Okay, then the value I can directly get it from the error object, error dot get message. Also, I just want to display the path where we are getting the error. I can do something like error map. I just need to put in the map, guys. Okay, dot put. Then I'll just give endpoint URL. Then value you can get from the error object, error dot, or I can directly get it from the request, right? Web request dot get path or something like that. Get, no, I guess we imported the wrong argument. Okay, my bad. It should be server request, guys. Because in Spring Reactive functional endpoint, we define the input as a server request and response as a server response. So I'll just define request. Then I'll just give this request dot path. Fine. We'll see why this is crying. Provided server request. Okay. I guess we imported the wrong one. Let me see. This should be from default error attributes. That is correct. Web reactive error. Okay. This should be from reactive, not from the servlet. Okay. We are good now. Anything else if you want, you can check what all field you are getting from the request.get or request dot. You can get if there is any variable or input, you can get the principal, you can get the query param, whatever the field we are getting from the request, you can capture if you want to return that as part of your error message. Okay, that is how you can just capture it and just put in the error map. But for now, to show you the demo that we can customize the error attributes, I just follow the to field. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll just simply return it now, error map. It is up to you guys. As per your application need, you can define n number of field. Why this is crying? Return error map. Okay, something wrong. Just give me a second. Let me check. Just add error map. Let me check what is the error it is suggesting. String. Okay, so this should be object, guys, because the return type itself is string of object map. So that is fine now. Okay, now simply what I'll do, I'll just, let's remove this unused import. Let me rerun my application. So it started. Now let's hit the endpoint. Okay, so this is what from functional endpoint, right? Just hit this endpoint. We are getting the endpoint URL and the message, correct? This is what the two field we set here. If you observe here, message and endpoint URL. That is what we are getting here. Also, we are getting the status code as 400. Since this is the global approach, rather than hard code the status code, you can just set it dynamically. Since this is the demo app and I have only one endpoint, functional endpoint to show you, I just keep a exception and I forcefully set the status code as 400. So if you remember, we created a class, right? Okay, this one. Here you just keep the status code as bad request. It is up to you. You can create n number of custom exception to handle different status code, or you can make this field dynamic. Okay. So this is how you can handle the error or exception at global level using the Spring Reactive functional endpoint approach. There is not straightforward approach. You need to create two class, book API exception handler, extend from this, and for customizing the error attributes, you need to create another class that is called global error attributes, or you can give any name, and that need to be extends from default error attributes. Okay, but make sure to import the correct package statement. This should be reactive. There will be two packages you will find, one from servlet, one from the reactive. Make sure you import the proper package and you implemented these two class to handle the exception in functional endpoint approach. Okay,